You've got a way to keep me on your side. You give me cause for love that I can't hide. For you I know I'd even try to turn the tide. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
Johnny Cash was an American country singer, songwriter, and guitarist. His music career started in the 50s and extended beyond his death in 2003 with several posthumously released albums. The height of his popularity was in the late 60s and then a resurgence in the late 90s into the 2000s. He was known as the Man in Black after a line in one of his early songs, which inspired him to create the image, wearing all black on stage, in contrast to most country singers at the time who were wearing rhinestones and other glitzy stuff. He famously recorded a couple of albums in concerts in jail at San Quentin at Folsom Prison. His well-known singles include The Ring of Fire and I Walk the Line. He has produced a large number of albums and sold a very large number of records. He's one of the most successful country artists of all time. He had a profound and persistent Christian faith. He struggled with addictions for all of his personal life. He famously married one of his backing singers, June Carter, who he proposed to live on stage after he'd got clean at one point, which was a long-lasting marriage and relationship. He championed Native American rights and befriended American presidents, and he had a long-standing association with evangelist Billy Graham. Hi, my name's Dan. So this was Johnny Cash's first ever album, and out of a lot of albums, that's quite something to be able to identify that almost. It's also one of the first albums that was released by the record label he was with at that point, which was Sun Records, who were particularly famous for being Elvis's label for a while. And this is the very early days of albums anyway, and certainly in terms of LPs in 1957. This is my first time listening to it, but I do know some of these songs on the album. So the musical backing is interesting. So there's guitar, and I think electric bass. There's no drums mostly, and somehow that's not particularly noticeable. And some of it, usually not at the same time as the singing, the simple solo lines. So that's either done on the bass or it's done on low guitar strings. I'm not quite sure which, just picking up from the sound. There are times when the higher strings are used, and it's definitely an electric guitar that's being used in those bits. Through the album, it's a consistent sound, and the kind of quality of the production is consistent, although it's a remastered version that I was listening to, so that might account for that consistency. It sounds, though, like most of it was recorded in the same session. I don't actually know about that. There are occasional other things, as I said, as lead guitar comes in. There's one song that's got backing singers in it. I mean, this was, you'd fairly clearly describe this as being country because it's Johnny Cash and because of the nature of the songs, but actually in some ways it's quite rockabilly in approach. Not kind of rock and roll, but it's got this kind of cross between the kind of rockabilly and country. And I think it's worth noting that at this time on the Sun record label, Carl Perkins, I believe, was also one of their stars at the time. So there are people who've been with me for a while will know that I have an aversion to country, but there are some aspects that particularly put me off. Sometimes I don't like, for some country, the singing's quite nasal. That's not the case here. Sometimes I would say it's overly mawkish and sentimental and manipulatively emotional. I would say that there is some emotion in here, but it's not overtly strong. It's not kind of tear-jerking songs about little boys who's lost their mother and ghosts coming back and stuff like that. There's a little bit about the death in here. It is 1957, so that sort of thing is there, but it's not overly. And the other thing is that there's no pedal steel slide guitar in sight or in hearing at all here. So while it does have the song structures and the kind of harmonic structures of country, it doesn't feel like where country went in a few years. Well, certainly a few years after this, I think. Johnny Cash's voice is very recognisable. It's kind of a bassy growl, but it's got a gravitas to him even then. So this is obviously his first album in the career, which he carried through the whole of his career. Obviously, somehow he sounds kind of at the same time tough, but also kind of fragile, which is a nice trick to pull off. I think that there are other people who've pulled it off in their careers. I think that Madonna particularly pulled that off well, and also Robbie Williams. Anyway, back to this album. The songs are a mixture of Johnny Cash's own compositions and some covers of other people's songs and some traditional. And I pull out some songs particularly just to talk about. So the one that stands out here is I Walk the Line, which is a huge hit and very hard to avoid that. I think most people will know that. Interestingly, with multiple key changes in it, and it's actually, other than the key changes, it's a really simple song. The first track on the album is Rock Island Line, which is credited to Unknown. And I know this better in a couple of versions by Lonnie Donegan, who was a British skiffle artist. The Wreck of Old 97 is I don't know how much covered song. It's a traditional song, but I've certainly heard it by Johnny Cash before. Folsom Prison Blues, which I again know this track, and is connected with the fact that he did do a concert in Folsom Prison, which was a very well received live album, came from that. Cry Cry Cry, which I didn't know is apparently was a big hit for him. And then there was a gospel song in the middle there, which is I Was There When It Happened. And so I know that originally he'd approached Sun Records and he wanted to be a gospel artist, and they told him to go away and come back with a more kind of accessible sound. But he did continue to sing gospel songs throughout his career, and bring them in here and there. And with some artists, certainly with country artists, I sometimes wonder when they put the more gospel-oriented stuff, how much that's just kind of a nod um, to the Midwest Christians in America. In Johnny Cash's case, I really do feel that it wasn't, there wasn't anything fake about it, and he definitely had a strong faith of his own. I have a blind spot in my aversion to country. I've got a couple of them actually. So one of them is Dolly Parton, the other is Johnny Cash. And there are various reasons for those. I think the biggest reason is in my teens, I got two things. One was a record player for the first time, and the other one was a guitar. And I started to learn guitar, but I was also looking for cheap records that I could buy. And I made the decision very early on that although I did buy singles, I wasn't going to concentrate on singles because you got more music on an album. But albums were more expensive. And there was a record shop in the city where I lived that had a bargain bin effectively, and they had all sorts of things in there. One of the things that I got several of were Johnny Cash albums for 50p a shot at the time, which was really cheap for an album. And after I got the first one, I kind of going, really, do I want this? But I grew to really quite like him, partly because I was at the same time learning to play guitar. Now, a lot of the other stuff that I liked was kind of prog rock and other pop stuff. But Johnny Cash's music is very simple and it's really good for learning guitar too. So it's great, simple music. It's got a great sense of humour. Um, Not that doesn't particularly come through on this album. He's done several comic songs really well. He's also got a great integrity to it that I've always, I guess, retrospectively would say was something that attracted me. He did concerts at prisons famously. There was the two that were released as albums, but he did several more, and he did them as free concerts. And he championed various causes. And despite his addiction demons, he kept a dignity to him that, again, is something that I find quite attractive to it. So back to this album. I really enjoyed listening to this. It's very accessible and easy to listen to. It is country and it is fairly kind of simple songs. For me, it's got the warmth of nostalgia. If I didn't have this particular nostalgia for Johnny Cash, I wonder how I'd feel about it. But I do. So this is how I feel. I like it. As always, at this point, I'd like to invite you to tell me what you think of the album. So please do by leaving a comment. That's it from me for now.
I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling around the bend, and I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on. But that train